Ooh, I hate that Sonic!
Sonic Adventure is a polarizing title. Some find it to be a mediocre slog, with weak storytelling and poor pacing, an early 3D title showing its age. Others find it to be terrific, with the right mix of attitude and seriousness, responsive controls, and a gorgeous presentation that still holds up under scrutiny. Where one finds ambition, another finds frivolousness. Where one sees adventure, another sees padding. Whichever side one finds themselves on, there is little doubt Sonic Team did create a game that left a lasting impression on those who played it, and debates about its merits are still being had nearly 22 years later. As I revisit Sonic Adventure yet again, I'm not playing to have a good time. Rather, I'm playing to learn. What is it about Sonic Adventure that some find so endearing? What is it about Sonic Adventure that some find so painful? What qualities does Sonic Adventure contain that cause such a wide range of opinions? Let's dive in. The main hook of Sonic Adventure is the 6 intertwining story arcs. Sonic's campaign begins with the introduction of a new foe, Chaos, who has been summoned by Eggman. As Sonic races around trying to stop Eggman's latest plan for world domination, he comes across other characters from the Sonic universe. This begins with Tails, who Sonic spots having plane trouble above the skies of Station Square. The duo later runs into Knuckles and the Mystic Runes, who demand Sonic return some emeralds. Next, Sonic bumps into Amy, who requests Sonic be a bodyguard for her bird friend before being captured by Eggman. Sonic's next encounter is with E102 Gamma, who when now freed Amy seems to have befriended. Lastly, Sonic has a brief encounter with Big the Cat, and Chaos has swallowed his friend. After each encounter, the new character becomes unlocked. Players can then play through each campaign and experience the events from a new perspective and learn how they came to cross Sonic's path. Why was Tails having plane problems? Why does Knuckles think Sonic has pieces of the Master Emerald? How did Amy find herself captured? Why does Amy save E102 Gamma? And finally, what is it with Big the Cat anyway? It is ambitious, for sure, and borrows storytelling techniques found in film, with the most obvious example being Pulp Fiction. From a gameplay perspective, it gives the player incentive to actually play the other characters to fill in the blanks and see how they came to interact with Sonic on his quest to stop Eggman yet again. There is a second story arc that lingers throughout all 6 campaigns as well, and that is the story of Chaos. Early on, Eggman declares it is Chaos, the god of destruction. It seems whenever Eggman finds a Chaos Emerald, he can feed it to Chaos, who will grow in size and power. Chaos himself seems like an homage to Terminator 2, with the Chaos mimicking the T-1000's shape-shifting capabilities, along with his ability to quickly recover from damage. No matter how many pieces Sonic smashes Chaos into, it always comes together and soldiers on. However, the storytellers wanted to give a backstory of sorts to this mysterious liquid god. The first hint at the nature of the beast occurs when Sonic reaches the end of the Lost World stage, taking place inside an ancient temple in the jungle. A large creature is shown destroying an ancient city. Eggman also references reading about Chaos on old stone tablets, suggesting the creature is quite old. Sonic also has a vision or a dream or flashback or something. All 6 characters have these visions of an ancient Echidna civilization. Talking to the Echidnas reveals they are all battle-ready, and the character to call seems concerned about her father disrupting the Chow and the Emeralds in their thirst for conquest. These flashbacks also serve to tempt the player to play through all 6 story arcs, learning more about what happened in the past and how it relates to the events of the present. Moving along is the world itself. The game is called Sonic Adventure, and the team's goal was to introduce RPG elements to the franchise. This was accomplished in 3 ways. First is the story, as touched upon. Second are the hub worlds, called Adventure Fields. And lastly, each character has upgrades. While Sonic Adventure's story is often the most discussed and dissected element of the game, I do find the Adventure Fields have an equal impact on the game overall. There are 4 main areas to explore: Station Square, Mystic Runes, the Jungle, and the Egg Carrier. The Adventure Fields contain character upgrades and keys, but are also used to trigger cutscenes and interaction stages. This drastically alters the gameplay structure from a string of action stages to something slower paced. In many ways, the ambition is similar to another 1998 title, Ocarina of Time, having players traverse a hub world to trigger cutscenes, find upgrades, and locate new dungeons to conquer. While certainly exciting in 1998, having fully realized 3D areas to explore with few limitations, the novelty has certainly worn off 20 plus years later. Instead, thought and function will be needed for the Adventure Fields to withstand stand the test of time. Sonic Adventure does a few things right in terms of the hub worlds and progression. Things are unlocked slowly in an attempt to not overwhelm the player. The player can only go to the casino at night, for example, preventing access to the area before the time comes. The train workers go on strike at one point, preventing players from accessing the mystic runes. The jungle is gated off until it is time for players to actually visit for story and action stage purposes. Same goes for the egg carrier. While I recall the hub worlds being confusing, as I experience them and take notes today, they are far more thoughtful than I remember. Even better, the game does a decent job nudging the player along from point to point. A help orb is almost always available in both Station Square and Mystic Runes to guide players to their next destination. Other elements are also used, such as camera panning, guiding players forward. NPC characters are also helpful. What they say changes as the adventure unfolds, giving players a reason to interact with them. As I played through all 6 campaigns twice, once on the GameCube and a second time on the Dreamcast, I was unable to find a single instance where the player was left without guidance on where to go next. One of my biggest pet peeves in any game is being stuck and not knowing where to go. Thankfully, I find any navigation gripes I have with Sonic Adventure are based more on my preference for them to not exist than any actual structural issue. Even better, the GameCube version includes a map for each area. This is most beneficial in the jungle, which is a mess of similar looking paths. At one point during Knuckles' campaign, the player needs to find a key in this maze, and having a map is invaluable for navigation, letting players see the little nooks and crannies one might miss when wandering around unguided. Although the map of the egg carrier doesn't really match the 3D space as I envision it in my mind. The final RPG elements are the character upgrades. Some of these are optional, others are required for progression. Sonic's first upgrade is the Lightspeed Shoes, allowing him to dash across a trail of rings. This is used in later stages to cross large gaps. This can be upgraded with the optional Crystal Ring, reducing the time needed to charge it up. A second mandatory upgrade is the Ancient Light. This grants Sonic the ability to perform the Lightspeed Attack, used for attacking armored enemies. What I find most puzzling, however, is how the upgrades are utilized and pushed on the player. The player is required to obtain the Lightspeed Shoes, as it triggers the shift to nighttime, opening up the casino and allowing progression. But outside of that, the utility is limited to just a few level gimmicks. The time it took to find the sewer, obtain the item, charge the damn thing, and progress the day cycle doesn't match the utility provided. Same goes for the Lightspeed Attack. There is a progression gate with a caged monkey blocking access to Red Canyon. Until the player finds the Ancient Light, they cannot dispatch the monkey and progress the adventure. And again, the utility of the Ancient Light isn't great, and I found myself using it in just one area of the entire game. Generally, it is more efficient to just take damage and continue on, rather than stopping to charge it up. Sonic's upgrades feel optional and never reach their full potential, like, say, used in interesting boss encounters, but are thrusted upon the player as progression gates, slowing down the adventure. Tails has one mandatory upgrade. The Rhythm Badge allows Tails to do the continuous tail rotation attack. The acquisition of this item happens during one of the flashbacks, and Tails cannot escape until the item is found. On paper, the continuous tail attack should be helpful, but as Tails flies over enemies rather than engage them, it is somewhat pointless. Even the final boss encounter is far easier when performing a normal jump, further negating its use. Again, I can't help but feel like an optional item is forced upon the player as mandatory, and then never utilized in any meaningful way. Forcing the player to wander about this ancient world looking for an item which is never required for anything feels like a waste of the player's time. Moving along is Knuckles and his mandatory upgrade, the Shovel Claw. The Shovel Claw is needed to dig and find the monkey destruction switch, which removes the monkey who is again guarding the entrance to Red Canyon. Thankfully, the Shovel Claw is actually used quite a bit during the treasure hunting stages, as emerald shards may be underground. This enhances his overall gameplay. His first 2 stages don't have any digging, while his last 3 do, adding depth to the campaign. This is an upgrade done right. Not only is it a progression gate, but the tool is useful during gameplay and used in every stage after obtaining it. Amy Rose also has a single mandatory upgrade, the Warrior Feather. Unlike the previously mentioned upgrades which had to be sought out, the Warrior Feather is obtained during normal gameplay. It is rewarded after beating the Whack-A-Mole game, which also unlocks the path out of the prison area. While I never used the Spin Hammer attack, which the Warrior Feather grants, the fact I didn't spend any time obtaining it negates any complaints I might have. This theme is continued with Big the Cat. His mandatory Life Belt upgrade allows him to float over the water leading to Ice Cap Zone. There isn't any searching for it. It is obtained on the path to an action stage, and the utility provided is useful in his stages. I did seek out his optional Power Rod upgrade, which increases line length, along with a Lure upgrade, allowing for bigger fish, but these are optional and are not needed during a standard playthrough. Last but not least is E102 Gamma. His mandatory upgrade is the Jet Booster, adding a slow descent to his jumping. Like Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, one has to wander around the adventure field to find the required upgrade. Obtaining it acts as a progression gate to the next cutscene. Thankfully, the utility it provides is useful on the 3 stages Gamma encounters after obtaining it, so the reward system for looking for it is in place and is not a problem. For completion's sake, I wasn't aware the Jet Anklet, Fighting Gloves, Long Hammer, or Laser Blaster existed, so I won't talk about them. While I can appreciate what Sonic Team was attempting to accomplish, mandatory upgrades used for progression and to add depth to later action stages, I feel the execution is sloppy and inconsistent. The Shovel Claw and Jet Booster are terrific upgrades, fully integrated into the gameplay upon their acquisition from the adventure fields. I appreciate the Warrior Feather and Life Belt don't have to be sought out, as their utility is limited, but Sonic and Tails upgrades feel like afterthoughts, rarely integrated into the gameplay in clever or even meaningful ways, and do little more than pad out the playtime. My negative feeling towards the hub worlds are not because of the hub worlds themselves, which are adequately designed, especially with the added map feature, but rather because the time spent in them is too often wasted on things like finding mandatory upgrades that perform little function. Moving along is the action stages themselves. As everybody already knows, Sonic and Tails feature high-speed platforming, Knuckles has treasure hunting, Amy slow-speed platforming, Big the Cat has fishing stages, and Gamma has shooting gameplay. Sonic's campaign takes him through 10 action stages, where the name of the game is to race to the end. Sonic's homing attack from 3D Blast is now a default attack, and I like how it complements the gameplay. It keeps Sonic's momentum forward, matching his attack style with his primary goal of racing fast. His jumping also feels pretty great. There's a floatiness to his jump, allowing the player ample time to make accurate landings, and platforms are generally big enough, allowing enough slop. As judging distance forward or depth can be difficult to convey to the player in a 3D game engine, I find the floaty jump and large platforms complement the shortcomings of 3D jumping perfectly. While I don't care what year Sonic Adventure came out when reviewing it, I'll give props to Sonic Team for figuring it out far earlier than many developers. Stage gimmicks are also well done. From the iconic whale chase in Emerald Coast, the roller coaster in Twinkle Park, and the zip lines in Red Canyon, autopilot moments do a great job adding spectacle and personality to the stages, but never overstay their welcome. While modern Sonic games are often criticized for non-interactive moments, these spectacles have been with 3D Sonic since the beginning. Video games combine 3 elements to form an experience: visual, audio, and interactive. There is no requirement 100% of game moments incorporate all 3. It is okay to mix up the ratio on the fly. Stage gimmicks come in the interactive variety as well. Twinkle Park features a bumper car segment, Casinopolis has pinball, Skydeck shifts gravity, and Windy Valley features a tornado, for example. While the quality varies, I never felt like Sonic's campaign was overstaying its welcome. The level theming is fantastic, and the hazard variety is sufficient. Some are more offensive than others though. For every bumper car segment where one has to maintain speed to smash through enemies and feather the throttle to get through tight turns, there is a Skydeck. The end of this level features shifting gravity. Unfortunately, the designer's ambition exceeded their execution, resulting in Sonic falling in a lot of unpredictable ways or getting stuck to walls. The pinball stages are another oddity. The player needs to gather 400 rings and deposit them in a vault in order to reach the end goal. Sonic and pinball have generally been a good combination in the 2D era of Sonic, but the execution here in Sonic Adventure is poor. The Knights table has the player grabbing 5 cards to make a poker hand, with with better hands yielding more rings. The Sonic table has the player engaging a slot machine, and again, yielding more rings for better matches. Unfortunately, the physics engine is awful. Momentum and velocity are almost non-existent, and the flipper physics are not grounded in reality. The table design itself isn't good either. There are few shots to hit, few modes to enable, and overall, there is little substance. This is probably for the better, as the flipper physics don't allow for precise shots anyway. While I don't mind the change of pace, the execution is lousy. And then there are 2 Sky Chase substages. These are on-rail shooter segments, but again, the depth is completely lacking. A vast majority of each stage can be completed by mashing the action button. Actually moving to avoid obstacles is rarely required from the player. Again, it just feels like variety for variety's sake. Still, quibbles aside, the level design is usually great, with a good balance of speed, platforming, hazard dodging, with the occasional gimmick thrown in to keep the gameplay from becoming stale. I am struggling to find anything truly groundbreaking or even clever, but on the flip side, I think there is something appealing about the simple 2-button gameplay. Considering how complicated 3D platformers would get before dying off, I think Sonic Team was onto something here with a more streamlined approach. Sometimes less is more. Tails' gameplay is similar to Sonic, only he can fly and lacks a homing attack. And if I'm honest, I find this portion of the game less appealing each time I play it. Tails basically plays through truncated versions of Sonic stages. However, the stages don't really feel like they were designed with Tails' flight in mind. Therefore, Windy Valley and Skydeck become incredibly easy and borderline broken. Casinopolis is laughably brief. Ice Cap includes just the snowboarding section, which is fun enough, but not when it is just repeated. In fact, Speed Highway is the only stage that seems suited to Tails' skill set. Tails travels the stage on a completely different path than Sonic, so it doesn't feel like rehashed padding. Platform distance is long, and one could envision Tails having a far more engaging adventure had the developers took a similar approach to all of his stages' design. Instead, Tails gets a unique sandboarding stage. Yawn. Worse yet, the player is forced to play both Sky Chase stages a second time. Back in 1999, I didn't mind or even notice the lack of unique experiences. However, playing the game 3 times in a row, it becomes painfully obvious Sonic Adventure wasn't designed for Tails, and the experience feels tacked on. Moving on, we have Knuckles and his treasure hunting. Like Tails, Knuckles features 5 action stages, but unlike Tails, each stage feels tailor-made for Knuckles' non-linear gameplay. Knuckles can of course glide through the air and climb many surfaces, and the stages actually suit his gameplay style. Rather than being long levels, these are relatively compact and arena-like. Getting from one side to the other happens quickly, and the climbing allows Knuckles to ascend and descend as well. While I don't personally enjoy the treasure hunting, it is hard for me to point to any reason why this gameplay doesn't work. The radar system is very responsive, with both audio and visual cues signifying how far away one is from an emerald shard. And if one still needs more guidance, the player can talk to Tikal, who will literally point the player in the right direction. Between the arena-styled stages, generous radar, and useful help system, I found myself racing through collecting shards at a quick pace and rarely found myself stuck or annoyed. Instead, it felt like a fast-paced action stage with a non-linear path through the level. Hardly offensive, despite any personal preferences I might have. Sadly, Amy has a Tails problem. Her gameplay doesn't really match the level design. First, her acceleration is painfully slow, meaning reaching full speed can take forever or not happen at all on inclines. And this is a shame because she can do a hammer jump once she reaches full speed. It feels like there were some opportunities for this jump to be put to good use, but the potential never comes close to being realized. Instead, it feels like playing a slow character through stages designed for much faster ones. To be fair, Hot Shelter is a new stage, not available to the first 3 characters. However, instead of taking advantage of the Pico Pico hammer in clever and unique ways, Sonic Team attempted to add puzzle elements to her stages. This includes dropping color-coded blocks into color-coded squares, turning cranks, pushing stairs, and opening 5 doors. Despite being just 3 stages, Amy feels like a waste of time. The most notorious character is of course Big the Cat and his fishing. There are just 4 stages to fish in, and the gameplay is incredibly shallow. Just locate Froggy, cast the line, wait for Froggy to bite, yank the joystick in a direction, and hope to snag him. From here, reel him in without breaking the line. Sadly, despite being quick and easy, there is a lot of randomness involved involved, and I still don't have a 100% comprehension on what is expected of the player. While playing the GameCube version, snapping the joystick left or right would always snag froggy. However, on the Dreamcast version, sometimes down was needed, but even then, I never felt confident as to why I was supposed to snap the joystick in a specific direction. Reeling froggy in is a crapshoot as well, and he would get away even when my fishing meter hadn't reached the breaking point. In the end, I would just rapidly smash the action button. Thanks to the game mechanics, by rapidly pressing the action button, there is no risk of the line meter getting too tense and breaking. But again, mashing buttons without thought happens just a little too often in Sonic Adventure. Last but not least is E102 Gamma. This is an interesting and popular character, to say the least. Gamma starts each stage with a 3-minute countdown and must shoot down enemies to add time to the countdown. Even better, there is a combo system, so the more targets one locks onto before firing, the greater the time bonus. This sort of combo system would have been a great addition to the Sky Chase substages. That isn't to say Gamma offers great gameplay. The stages are mostly repeated, offer little in the way of challenge, but one can see there is potential here. Now, it has been popular for some to conclude Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are good, and Amy, Big, and Gamma are bad, and therefore half of Sonic Adventure is good, and therefore better than a certain sequel's 1/3 ratio. But the more I play Sonic Adventure, the more I find this to be inaccurate. Sonic offers a compelling gameplay experience for sure, with 10 action stages of mostly good quality. Knuckles too offers a good experience. While treasure hunting isn't my cup of tea, there is nothing objectively wrong with his gameplay. The 5 stages are designed with Knuckles' gliding and climbing in mind. There are more than enough tools available to the player to aid in Emerald location, and I never felt lost or stuck. Lastly, Gamma is alright. His quick acceleration and high top speed match the level design. His floating offers some satisfying jumping, and the combo system of the shooting gameplay adds depth. While I wish it was more refined, it never felt like padding, which is more than I can say for Tails, with one stage taking advantage of his skill set, and the rest feeling like retreads of what was already accomplished with Sonic. Amy's poor acceleration doesn't match the level design, and the puzzle elements are laughable at best. Finally, Big the Cat isn't good, with no depth or strategy to the gameplay whatsoever. However, even then, the popular half the game is good argument oversimplifies the experience. Instead of repeating this antiquated stance, I really want to explore the polarizing nature of Sonic Adventure. And to do that, I need to take a wider look at Sonic Adventure and somehow visualize the gameplay experience as a whole. So I went through all of my footage and gathered data on what a player actually does during a playthrough of Sonic Adventure. How much time is spent in action stages and boss battles versus how much time is spent on the adventure fields grabbing upgrades, opening up action stages, triggering cutscenes, and doing character battles. How much time is spent on story elements, flight stages, load screens, and the end credits. I think this ratio of gameplay to everything else is at the root of the polarizing nature. So I painstakingly reviewed my final playthrough and came up with a data set that I can visualize into graphs. As one can see here, Sonic's campaign is the longest by quite a margin. Additionally, nearly half of Sonic's campaign is action stages and boss fights. However, the remaining 5 campaigns are skewed heavily in the everything else category. To better visualize this, I'm going to use a 100% stacked bar graph. Here, we can really start to see how Sonic Team's structural direction impacts the game as a whole. A massive portion of Sonic Adventure is spent on story and the adventure fields. In fact, only Sonic and Knuckles crossed the 25% threshold for action stages and bosses, while the remaining characters are near or below 25%. This data actually surprises me, as it does not match my previous perception of an SA1 playthrough, but fact is more important than perception, so let's dive into the other elements. As noted earlier, Sonic Adventure is broken into 6 campaigns with intersecting story arcs. Sonic's campaign is straightforward, chasing Eggman across the game world, destroying chaos, and finally Eggman. It comes to a satisfying conclusion, and I really don't have any major complaints. I could have done without the character battles and the flying segments, but whatever. Tails Tails, on the other hand, is packed with filler. First, as Tails spends a majority of his time with Sonic, the cutscenes are basically the same. Sonic and Tails talk at the beach. Sonic and Tails confront Eggman in Mystic Ruins. Sonic and Tails get gassed by Eggman. Sonic and Tails meet up with Knuckles. It isn't until around the halfway point where Tails finally gets separated from Sonic and begins his own adventure, but even then, he just daydreams about Sonic. It isn't until the end of the third act that Tails' campaign finally offers something fresh for the player. Eggman fires a missile at Station Square, his plan B thanks to Sonic destroying Chaos and the egg carrier. Thankfully, the missile doesn't go off and Eggman escapes his own demise. Never launch a missile at a city while you are in said city. Tails gets to the missile first, which prevents it from going off, and then Tails and Eggman tango one last time. Upon victory, Tails gains some confidence, and the story comes to an end. While the conclusion is nice, the lead-up is disjointed or non-existent. Sonic Team offers a payoff, Tails saving Station Square without the aid of Sonic, but there is no setup. A majority of a Tails playthrough is unrelated. I find myself asking, what is the point of multiple characters if I'm not learning new things? Why is Sonic Team just retelling the same story? Now, Tails does have a flashback scene where Tikal offers information about the relationship between the Chaos Emeralds and the Master Emerald. Chaos is power, power enriched by the heart. In the final story, Tails somehow concludes Sonic is able to use the positive power remaining in the Chaos Emeralds, even after Chaos used up the negative power. Does this make any sense? Nope. Moving on, Knuckles offers more for the player to chew on. His campaign opens with Angel Island floating in the air with Knuckles guarding the Master Emerald. Eggman then smashes the Master Emerald, freeing Chaos along with Tikal, who were sealed inside. Without the power of the Master Emerald, Angel Island falls from the sky. Knuckles' goal is to then find the Emerald Shards and restore the Master Emerald. This is where the intertwining story works to some degree. We can see Chaos being released and how it came to be in Sonic's initial campaign. There is setup and a payoff. We also learn why Knuckles is so hostile towards Tails and Sonic. Eggman tells Knuckles they are after the Master Emerald Shards. However, the fact Knuckles believes Eggman is silly. Eggman literally attacks Knuckles with Chaos too. After Knuckles defeats it, Knuckles promptly believes everything Eggman tells him. Okay. On the flip side, Knuckles has more flashbacks to the ancient Echidna village. It is hinted Chaos was once a benign creature, guarding a race of beings called the Chow. Tikal begs Chaos to take the Chow and go somewhere else, as her father is going to raid the place, steal the emeralds, and use their power for conquest. In this final scene, we see the aftermath. The shrine has been destroyed, and Chaos has turned into a destructive monster. The aftermath of the sequence was shown as a mural in Sonic's campaign. Setup and payoff. Knuckles ends his journey where it began. The Master Emerald has been restored, Angel Island rises again, and Knuckles remains unclear about his destiny. Much like Sonic's campaign, this one is mostly unoffensive. However, some of the repeating elements remain. For example, cutscenes are repeated, like the encounter with Sonic and Tails in the Mystic Ruins. Even worse, a character battle is repeated for the third time. On the first go, Sonic homing attacks Knuckles 3 times and wins. On the second go, Tails rolls into Knuckles 3 times and wins. On this third go, Knuckles punches Sonic 3 times and wins. All 3 encounters are a complete waste of time, offer no strategy or compelling gameplay, and serve little purpose other than to pad out the length. Even worse is the Chaos 4 battle, which again happens 3 times. The fight is weak to begin with. Chaos's offensive attacks are easy to dodge. Chaos is immune to attack except during specific periods where he peeks from the water. Therefore, the player just waits around for these moments, avoiding easy attacks. Without any strategy, there is little engagement for the player, and this lackluster boss is repeated 3 times. Again, it is just filler. The Chaos 6 fight is also repeated, but this one isn't so bad. The player needs to disable eggs and then toss them into Chaos to freeze it. Thankfully, the playfield actually changes for Knuckles' battle. When Sonic encounters this boss, the floor is entirely intact. When it is Knuckles' turn, the floor is damaged and there are hazards. While not much, at least the fight evolved. Moving along, we have Amy Rose. It is here where I really begin to question Sonic Team's direction with the 6 intertwining stories. The campaign begins with a bird crashing into Amy's head. One of Eggman's robots wants this bird and Amy does her best to protect it. After Sonic fails to rescue her, Amy finds herself in a cell on the egg carrier. She befriends Gamma, who then frees her. But it is all for naught as Eggman extracts a Chaos Emerald from Amy's bird friend. After watching Amy save Gamma for the third freaking time, Amy discovers Birdie has a family and she reunites them. Along with the gameplay not matching the stage layout and the puzzle elements being basic and uninteresting, much of the story is just repeating what the player has already seen from Sonic's campaign and later Gamma's campaign. While I think it is sweet Amy befriends and protects a bird and reunites them out of the goodness of her heart, the campaign offers very little to the overall story of Eggman and Chaos. Her flashback hints that Chaos and Tikal were friends, but the player already knows this. Amy has no story arc. At the beginning, she dreams of Sonic. At the end of the story, she wants Sonic to respect her. Nothing is resolved. The campaign does little else but offer an explanation for the origins of one of the Chaos Emeralds, an origin that really doesn't matter. It amounts to a massive amount of fluff. Speaking of fluff, it's Big the Cat. Somehow, Big the Cat's frog friend possesses Chaos's tail and then eats a Chaos Emerald. Eggman wants to get the frog back so Chaos can get its tail back along with the Chaos Emerald. Except, as we can clearly see in Chaos 4, Chaos already has a tail. Ultimately, Chaos gets his tail back again, I guess, and the Chaos Emerald. Big gets his friend Froggy back, and that's it. It's dumb. Last but not least is Gamma. In addition to the unique gameplay, Gamma is unique in that the story presented is actually good. Despite having a lopsided gameplay to everything else ratio, the story elements are actually enjoyable. Gamma's campaign follows the life and death of one of Eggman's robots. The player sees the creation and training of a new robot. Then, on that fateful day, Gamma is ordered to guard the prison cell containing Amy. Through Amy's kind-hearted nature, Gamma determines Eggman is actually an enemy and goes on a mission to save his robot brethren, or save the animals inside them. I am not clear on this point, but it really doesn't matter. The E-Series robots are freed from Eggman's control. The final scene shows Gamma's final moments of life. Having freed his brothers from Eggman and suffering a critical wound during combat, his death was not in vain. While his story arc barely intersects with the main campaign of Sonic's battle with Eggman and Chaos, it works well enough as a standalone story. It stinks the player is forced to rewatch the same lengthy scenes from Amy's campaign, but they actually fit here. Gamma at the beginning of the story is different from the one at the end. He has changed and experienced growth, and it isn't tacked on to the end like Tails, but rather integrated into the fabric of the campaign at large. Good stuff. So, while I applaud Sonic Team's ambition for creating a much grander adventure for Sonic's 3D outing, the execution is often poor. Far too much of Sonic Adventure is spent in the adventure fields wasting time. This includes hunting for upgrades that are rarely integrated into the gameplay and often serve as nothing but progression gates. Without a real benefit, spending time seeking them out feels like a waste. Same goes for the character battles. While I guess they could be viewed as interactive story elements, they break the continuity of the story. And the story, despite taking up a massive amount of playtime, just isn't deep. I don't need to know where all 7 Chaos Emeralds are at all times. I don't care if one is Big's lucky charm. I don't care about where Chaos gets his tail from. I don't care about how Tails came to crash his plane. I don't care about how Eggman tricked Knuckles into attacking Sonic and Tails. Sometimes it is better to just leave things to the player's imagination. There is supposed to be a payoff to these moments, but when the story pieces are filling in, it often doesn't make sense and negates the need for 6 separate campaigns in the first place. And then, of course, is all of the repeated elements. The scene between Amy and Gamma is touching, but I don't need to see it twice. Sonic already unlocked Ice Cap and Windy Valley with their respective keys, so why does the player need to do this a second or a third time? Again, the continuity is broken and the repeating gameplay elements do nothing but pad out playtime. And this is the reason why I think Sonic Adventure is so polarizing. The novelty of seeing Sonic enter the third dimension has long since worn off. What is left is this, an incredibly bloated game. Tails' brief run-in with Eggman and the missile could have been added into Sonic's campaign, which is how Sonic 06 handled things, oddly enough. Amy's campaign could have been eliminated completely, leaving her important scenes in Gamma's campaign and trimming a lot of fat off the overall playtime. Same goes for Big the Cat. While his campaign is brief, it is a waste of nearly 40 minutes of the player's time with no story payoff. Most interesting, the three best characters, Sonic, Knuckles, and Gamma, would form the basis of the next entry into the series, meaning Sonic Team must have come to a similar conclusion when evaluating what worked and what didn't in Sonic Adventure. Even then, calling Sonic Adventure half good is still inaccurate. Sonic represents a third of Sonic Adventure, while Big is about a tenth. Now, I've mostly focused on Sonic Adventure DX, the enhanced port on the GameCube. As I began my research for this video, I stumbled upon an odd rabbit hole. There is a subset of the Sonic fanbase that feels the bad reputation Sonic Adventure has is because of this GameCube port, which was then used as the basis for future ports on the Xbox and PlayStation platforms. Some find most of Sonic's bad reputation stems from this port. Some have even gone as far to say Sonic Adventure feels like a different game. I was originally only going to cover the GameCube version of Sonic Adventure. It is easier to capture footage than the Dreamcast, and I like the improved frame rate. However, I wanted to see for myself if these really are different games. And you know what? Nope, same game. There are two schools of thought regarding the DX version. First is that it is very glitchy and players will randomly fall through the floor. Second, the texture changes, updated character models, and simpler lighting system degrade the atmosphere of the game to the point where it is no longer the same game. First, I am aware a glitch exists on Emerald Coast, as I've previously fallen victim to it, but on my 2 playthroughs of DX for this review, I never fell through any floor ever. In fact, my only fall through the floor moment came on my Dreamcast playthrough, not my GameCube one. In fact, I experienced many more oddities on the Dreamcast version overall, including camera hiccups and textures jittering. But randomly falling through the levels in the DX version, it just rarely happens. Unless one is looking for glitches and playing in unintended ways, this behavior appears to be exaggerated. Second is the graphical changes. Sonic and friends have been updated and now sport actual fingers and other shapely tweaks. Are the new models a downgrade? No. I guess someone could have a preference towards a rounder Sonic than a more ovally one, but I cannot come up with a single objective reason how one is better than the other, with the exception of the modeled fingers. There are other changes as well. A ton of texture work has been updated, which can be seen in virtually every stage. Water and lava has also been updated, helping them to look less grid-like when viewed at a distance. Lighting has also been changed, such as nighttime scenes lacking a bluish tint. Cars in Station Square are no longer shiny. Chaos 6 is brighter. Gamma no longer has glowing eyes. The player can see the bottom of the pond. Skydeck lacks the mid-stage lighting changes. The list goes on, and it is fascinating for sure. But are these small changes really the reason why Sonic Adventure is viewed less positively than it used to be? No. Just no, this needs to stop. Character models, lighting changes, and transparency effects are not the reason Sonic Adventure continues to receive poorer review scores with each passing release. Sonic Adventure DX and Sonic Adventure are the same game. Whatever graphical improvements the Dreamcast original has, and ignoring the improvements made with the DX version, do not change the fundamental flaws with the game at large. Sonic Adventure is a chore to play. Sonic Team wanted to create an adventure game, but failed. The upgrades are not good. The adventure fields are not used to their full potential. Instead, they are something the player has to slog through to trigger cutscenes. Level placement within the adventure fields is not logical, forcing a ton of back and forth backtracking and little in the way of player engagement. And far too much of Sonic Adventure is repeated over and over, from character battles to bosses and stages. And of course, all of this is mandatory, with the final fight against Perfect Chaos not being available until all 6 campaigns are cleared. These structural issues were not introduced with Sonic Adventure DX. Issues with alpha channels and transparencies are the least of Sonic Adventure's problems. Of course, Sonic Adventure isn't all bad, and while I've already touched upon this in the gameplay portion of this video, some other highlights include some of the bosses. While some are easy and repeated, others are unique and thoughtful. Chaos 6 is fun as it actually utilizes Sonic and Knuckles' skill set, first disabling an egg with their respective attacks, then picking it up and throwing it. Chaos 6 also has a large arsenal of attacks to dodge, keeping players on their toes, unlike, say, Chaos 4. The Egg Viper is another strong fight. The player has to maintain maintain top speed to avoid projectiles, chain together homing attacks, and jump onto moving platforms. There is a timing and skill element that keeps the player engaged. Same goes for Tails' battle with the Egg Walker. There are a barrage of attacks to dodge, and timing is needed to avoid the stomp attacks and then strike before the vulnerability window closes. Even Amy has a good fight against Zero. This is perhaps the most strategic fight in the entire game, ironically enough. One needs to strategically lure Zero near the electrified exterior, then hammer Zero to knock him into it. This will reveal his weak spot, which can then be hit with the hammer. He has varied attacks, which require precision jumping to avoid. Despite Amy's levels being meh, this final fight is good. The soundtrack is of course terrific as well. As this video is already getting long and there are dozens if not hundreds of videos covering the soundtrack at length, I honestly have nothing to add to the discussion. Instrument selection, composition, mood, atmosphere, lyrics are all strong across the board, and the soundtrack is easily the highlight of Sonic Adventure. For me in 1999, the amazing soundtrack, terrific visuals, there was really nothing quite like it in 99, and seeing my favorite childhood characters interacting in 3D space and actually talking was, well, awesome. I didn't care Tails' campaign was more or less Sonic Light. I didn't care Amy had problems walking up inclines or the puzzles were laughably simple. I let it slide Big the Cat existed and as fishing was subpar. In my mind, these roadblocks were worth the price of admission for seeing Sonic re-enter the spotlight. However, as the years passed, the novelty of seeing these characters in 3D has diminished. My tolerance for filler and padding isn't what it once was. As I've grown as a gamer, having beaten many more 6th gen platformers, and as I've started thinking more critically about game design, what I perceive when I play Sonic Adventure and what the facts are have drifted apart. And when viewed from this prism, Sonic Adventure is rightfully polarizing. The interconnected story is ambitious, but rarely does the player gain new insight into the greater plot. Knowing how Chaos got a tail in this scene isn't worth the time it took to get there. Same goes for Birdie's Chaos Emerald. Running from cutscene to cutscene is tedious, not adventurous. I can understand why it is so beloved. It is definitely ambitious. However, I can also understand why the review scores keep sliding, and it isn't because of the DX port. Sonic Adventure is filled with padding and filler. Too many moments are repeated, too many gameplay elements duplicated, and too many story elements lack a proper setup and payoff. It is 2 hours worth of gameplay and story crammed into a 6-hour adventure, and when played repeatedly, it becomes quite clear Sonic Adventure is showing its age.